know if you ever heard about this, but Peggy the Cursed Doll.
Nah, I actually haven't.
So there's at least over 80 counts of people reporting that after looking at the pictures, the eyes of the doll, looking videos of the doll, they report headaches, nausea. Apparently, this is true because it happened to me.
What the fuck?
I looked into the eyes, and then out of nowhere, I started feeling like I wanted to throw up. I don't know if it's placebo effect. I don't know what it was, bro, but I started feeling mad weird. Also, there were reports of people getting nosebleeds after watching this.
Yo, why are we watching this video?
And also, there was a British woman who got a heart attack after watching this video.
I'm not gonna look. I'm not gonna look, bro.
Bro, you had to look.
I'm not gonna look, bro.
Just look down. Look down on my phone.
I'm not gonna look, bro. Fuck that. Fuck that, bro. I'm not gonna look, bro. I don't give a fuck. Y'all the viewers can see this shit if y'all want, bro. I'm not looking, bro.
The origin of like the original owner is not really known, or like who owned it first, but all I do know was there was this woman back in 2015 where she went to a garage sale and then she came across this doll and automatically she was drawn to the doll. So she bought it back home, and literally that same night she started getting really bad nightmares. It wasn't just a one-time thing, it was a consistent thing where she would have the same nightmare over and over, and it would be really horrible nightmares to the point where she would wake up sweating so bad and where she couldn't really breathe. She tried to get the doll and the house blessed by 2 different priests from 2 different churches.
It didn't work.
She escaped with a second to spare.
Hey, yo, Rich.
The drama unfolded at 2 in the morning when the woman arrived home from a long day at work. She says she noticed the stranger lurking outside her building.
So the 50-year-old woman who was seen in that video has to this day still remained unidentified. And on September 23rd, 2021, she was returning home when this man suddenly decided to charge at her. The woman later claimed that she had seen the man and a friend hanging out acting sketchy at the base of her apartments, and that if she hadn't have locked her door the same way that she did and gotten in the nick of time, she still doesn't know what could have happened. I mean, this video is honestly horrifying. I can't imagine someone chasing me to my apartment door and barely being able to lock the door in time to keep them outside. Who knows what this person would have done if they had gotten into the apartment with this woman? It's really frightening. So police at first had no idea who this guy was, but they eventually identified him as 42-year-old Orisha Lucky. And he had 37 prior arrests on his record before that night. 37 different arrests. So after Orisha was arrested, he was charged with attempted burglary, harassment, and criminal trespassing. But it's still, that video is just so frightening, and it really is scary to think of what could have happened if she didn't get the door closed and locked just in time.
This man overdosed on carrots. Basil Brown was a man ahead of his time, an English health enthusiast who believed the key to longevity was in what you consumed. But his obsession with a so-called superfood led to an unusual and horrifying death. In the 1970s, Basil Brown was captivated by the health benefits of carrot juice. He drank it religiously, convinced it could cleanse his body and fortify his soul. But Basil wasn't just sipping on a glass or two, he was consuming up to 10 gallons a week. As days turned into weeks, Basil's friends and family noticed something alarming. His skin began to change, turning a strange, almost glowing orange color. Basil's excessive carrot juice intake caused hypovitamosis A rare and dangerous condition. Vitamin A in large doses is toxic. It overwhelms the liver, leading to severe damage and even failure. But Basil dismissed the warnings, believing he was on path to perfect health. One day, after weeks of relentless consumption, Basil fell ill. Nausea, dizziness, and abdominal pain overwhelmed him. His liver could no longer cope, and the toxicity spread through his body like poison. When help finally arrived, it was too late. Basil was found lifeless, his body a chilling reminder of the extremes he had pushed it to. An autopsy confirmed the cause of death, acute liver damage caused by a toxic overdose of vitamin A.
This boy vanished from the Isle of Wight in extremely suspicious circumstances. The CCTV of his last sighting is haunting. It was the 2nd of November 1996 on the Isle of Wight, a small island in the English Channel. Damien Nettles was just 16 years old, but he was very tall for his age. He was often mistaken for being a lot older. He had 3 siblings and they all lived with their parents, and he was described by loved ones as sensitive, caring and thoughtful. He was a really lovely boy with no reason for anyone to harm him, which is why it was so disturbing when he vanished. On the day in question, just after 7 p.m, his dad dropped him off at his friend Chris's house. Chris lived on Grange Road, and Damien told his dad that he'd be back no later than midnight. However, when his parents woke up the following day, there was no sign of Damien at home. He just never returned. Now, this was really out of character for him, but his parents were really hoping that he'd just maybe had a couple of drinks the night before and ended up staying the night at Chris's. Damien's mum did what any mum would do and rang Chris's house to see if Damien was there. Unfortunately, though, Chris said no. Unsettlingly, he told the mum that he and Damien had parted ways at around 10:30 the night before. This was really bad news, so Damien's mum immediately started calling round anyone that she knew who could have potentially seen Damien, but again had no luck. Eventually, Damien's parents reported him missing to police, but when they got to the police station, it was kind of a little bit weird. They were knocking on the door, but nobody came to answer. They literally had to pound and keep ringing and ringing until eventually someone answered the door. Even then, the police seemed really dismissive and kind of just said to Damien's mum to go home and he'd probably just come back eventually. They just really seemed like they couldn't be bothered to look for Damien. It was down to the poor family to do the legwork. When his mum phoned the station days later for an update, she was even deemed a hysterical mother. They started saying to her that she was hindering the investigation by asking for updates. She absolutely wasn't hindering the investigation, and if anything, the family ended up doing a lot of good detective work. One of the family members managed to get hold of CCTV of Damien in a chip shop with around 4 or 5 other guys. Now, again, police didn't really seem interested in investigating this or identifying these people in the CCTV. Finally, police were kind of pressured into finding more CCTV so they could put together a bit of a timeline. Boys had been to a house party that evening, popped to a shop, then a few pubs, then that chip shop. That's when Chris and Damien parted ways at around 10:30. Witnesses reported seeing Damien wandering around, kind of trying to get into pubs and seeming a bit worse for wear. He was then seen at a bus stop. He got onto the bus, he tried to take a photo with the bus driver and then got off again, thanking the driver. He was then seen at the chip shop asking for 1 please. Now, he repeatedly just says over and over to the man behind the counter that he wants 1 please. And the guy is almost getting a bit frustrated. He can't really figure out what he's asking for. And he says, "Do you want chips?" And then Damien says yes. He was finally seen just after midnight on the high street. Frustratingly, police then apparently lost a bunch of the CCTV footage. The police just said that Damien must have fallen into the harbour, but if this was the case, then his body would have resurfaced. Searches were conducted of the water and he was nowhere to be found. Family ended up hiring a private investigator, and eventually in 2002 it came to light that a substance dealer called Nikki McNamara may have been involved. Now, Nikki had actually died in 2002 from an HOD. An informant told the family that Nikki killed Damien in a row over substances. He'd apparently hit him and not intended to kill him, but accidentally did. His body was then buried near a cycle path. Now, Chris actually did tell officers that he and Damien did know this Nikki guy. He had in fact bought substances from a house where Nikki'd been staying. A witness also allegedly saw Nikki burning clothes around the time of the disappearance. Now, 8 arrests were made of people who were apparently Nikki's associates, but they were then later released. A number of properties were searched that were linked to these people and substance dealing, but frustratingly no evidence was found. As of today, Damien remains a missing person and his family is yet to have any answers or closure.
Why the fuck is the United States government giving us a morality lesson about TikTok? Acting like they know what's best for us. In the past, the US government has sponsored and helped with the operation of pedophile rings. They've helped cover up crimes, they've assassinated journalists, they've helped run drugs, run guns. They've run covert operations to spy on their own citizens, created databases with American dissidents in them, aka people that have been to protests. And all you gotta do is look up a few names. Look into Danny Casolaro, the journalist who was found dead in his hotel room. Look into the death of Barry Seal, the man who was helping fly in drugs and guns for the US government into Arkansas. This isn't a one-party problem. This isn't a one political figure problem. This is an institutional problem in every single political party. And it's like one of the people said during the Supreme Court hearings, they're afraid that China is going to use TikTok to sow distrust in the American government and American public figures. Newsflash, nobody trusts you already. TikTok isn't making the problem any worse. TikTok is helping people wake up to the fact that these people, none of them are for you. They're all against you. Literally, the United States government is like one big joke and you're not in on it. And you never will be. And that's why I'm so pissed that we're losing this platform because it represents freedom of information. I've learned so many things on this app. So many millions of Americans have connected on this app. Millions depend on this app for income. It's a sad day. Very sad day.
Creepy short film that Adult Swim posted it on their YouTube channel. What's it called? This House Has People in It. Some sort of like analog horror type of thing. It's a family inside a house, and the wife and the husband and their baby are just completely chilling. Meanwhile, there's their daughter laying on the floor, who they don't even know if she's dead. She's been laying there for 2 hours, and everybody else is not reacting. You have the brother like just fucking around
Chilling.
the living room.
Yeah.
The grandma, she's watching TV, and then there's a plumber downstairs. It wasn't until she started asking for help, begging for help, and she was falling through the floor, they eventually started paying attention to her.
Stop moving. Stop moving. Stop.
Oh God. Be careful. Oh my God. Maddie.
We're a family, no matter what anyone says. You can fly, Madison.
She's coming through.
Now, Adult Swim has never explained as to what exactly that was about, but people in the comments were saying that it has probably something to do with mental health, family trauma, because the parents weren't paying attention to the daughter, neglecting the baby, and then nobody really paying attention to each other and not really knowing exactly what's going on with each other. They just live with each other instead of actually being a family. That's why it's called This House Has People in It.
This man died in one of the worst ways possible. In 1999, a horrific accident at a Japanese nuclear facility led to one of the most tragic cases of radiation exposure in history. Hisashi Aochi was a worker at a nuclear facility in Japan, and on September 30th, 1999, a routine procedure turned catastrophic due to negligence and improper safety measures. While mixing a uranium solution, Hisashi Aochi and his colleagues created a critical mass, triggering a criticality accident that released a lethal burst of neutron radiation. Hisashi was exposed to an unimaginable dose of radiation, about 17 sieverts, which is far beyond what any human could survive. Emergency responders rushed him to the hospital, but the damage was catastrophic. Within hours, Hisashi Aochi's body began to fail. He experienced acute radiation syndrome, violent vomiting, severe burns which melted his skin off his body, and an unending agony that left him begging for death. Doctors worked tirelessly administering experimental treatments and blood transfusions, but nothing alleviated his suffering. His family, horrified, watched helplessly as he withered in pain. His family remained by his side, torn between hope and despair. Hisashi, unable to escape the torment of his injuries, repeatedly begged to be allowed to die, pleading for an end to his suffering. The radiation ravaged his body, collapsing his immune system and leading to multiple organ failures. His skin became grotesquely disfigured and his health plummeted. After over 2 months of excruciating pain and suffering, Hisashi Aochi succumbed to his injuries on December 21st, 1999.
This killer got the nickname the Devil's Daughter after becoming the UK's youngest ever murderer. It was the 7th of June 1992 in Camberley in Surrey. Katie Ratcliffe was just 18 years old. She was known as Kate to her friends and family. Although her hair does look a little crazy in the picture above, that was kind of the fashion for the time, and she was working as an apprentice hairdresser. She'd just gone through a breakup, and so she was naturally really trying to build back up her self-confidence and her mood. She did what most of us did when we were 18 in those circumstances, and she decided to go on a night out. She went with her friend Michelle to a nightclub called Ragamuffins. Her and her friends stayed there until around 4 a.m. when the club closed. The girls found themselves separated at that point, and I feel like that always happened to me and my friends when the club was closing. You kind of just, in the chaos, you just get split up. Now, this is obviously very dangerous, but like I said, I feel like this always used to happen to me, and like as a young girl, I'd just stagger my way home in the dark. Katie ended up trying to make her way home, but she would never get there. It wasn't until the next day that Katie's body was discovered. Now, she was unclothed and had been callously dumped, deceased, by a cemetery. She had been absolutely brutally attacked, and the horrific injuries that she had just don't bear thinking about. She had stab wounds all over her body, including in her private areas. Police immediately started looking for suspects. They obviously needed to apprehend this vicious killer before they took their next victim. Unfortunately, they just kept hitting dead ends. They just couldn't find who had committed this hideous act. 2 years would ultimately go by until police had a frantic phone call. Strangely, it was actually the 7th of June, and this was the 2-year anniversary since Katie's murder. A student named Sharon Carr had viciously attacked another 13-year-old student at school with a knife. There seemed to be absolutely no rhyme or reason for this attack. According to witnesses, she'd simply gone up to the child in the school toilets with a big grin on her face and then plunged a knife into her back. Luckily, a group of other students who were nearby at the time bravely intervened and pulled Sharon off her, and thankfully the girl survived. Police obviously rushed to the scene and arrested Sharon. When they took her in for questioning, she offered some extremely disturbing information. Massive trigger warning here for animals. She told officers she enjoyed stabbing animals such as cats and had cut the head off a dog with a spade. It transpired that Sharon had had a difficult upbringing with a mum and stepdad who were incredibly chaotic and neglectful. They ended up splitting up after a horrific incident that Sharon had apparently witnessed, where her mum threw boiling hot fat over her stepdad. Sharon spent a period of time in foster care before being given back to her mum. So fast forward now to Sharon's arrest. She ended up being sent for a medical assessment, but had a violent outburst while in the facility and tried to strangle 2 members of staff. She was charged for 2 counts of actual bodily harm and was held in multiple psychiatric units, but kept getting moved due to attacking more people. So you might be wondering how this all relates to Katie's murder. While she was detained, Sharon started talking to people about Katie's killing. She seemed kind of obsessed with it and just always would bring up Katie in conversations, so people started to get suspicious and she was questioned. During this time, her journals were also seized, which again had thoughts about Katie's murder, as well as disturbing fantasies about it. One paragraph stated, "If only I could you again." She ended up confessing to the murder to police. Oftentimes people will confess to murders that they haven't actually committed, but actually she told police that she'd stolen a bracelet from Katie, and this was information that police hadn't revealed to the public. She would end up giving loads and loads of detail and information to the police about the killing, and disturbingly laughed as she did. She told them how she was accompanied by 2 male friends on the night in question, and they'd spotted Katie walking home from the club. They stopped the car, got Katie in the car, and then drove her to a secluded area. Now, Katie had actually tried to run away when she realised she was in danger, but Sharon chased her with a knife and the 2 males drove off. Although police did have the details of these 2 males, they didn't have enough evidence to actually convict them of a crime. Sharon ended up withdrawing her confession and pleading not guilty due to reason of insanity. However, she was found guilty and she was sentenced to 14 years. She does remain behind bars to this day due to how much of a danger she poses to the general public.
The abduction and murder of Sierra Joggin is a case that will forever scare me, not only because of the way she was found, but because it uncovered a barn of horrors in a small community owned by a local man with a history of abducting women, and the fact that this could have all been prevented had this sick man stayed in prison like he was supposed to. Sierra Joggin was 20 years old when she mysteriously disappeared on July 19th, 2016. She was on summer break from the University of Toledo and was staying with her parents at their home on County Road 6 in Metamora, Ohio. That evening, Sierra was at her boyfriend Josh's house, not super far away, when she decided that she should probably start heading home. So at around 6:45 p.m., Sierra left on her purple bicycle with Josh riding alongside her on his motorcycle. He wanted to make sure that she got home safe, even though it really wasn't that far away. But once they got on to County Road 6, Sierra insisted that she would be okay to ride the rest of the way home alone and told him to go home. So Josh kissed her and told her he loved her, and also told her to text him once she got home. But Sierra never made it home, and this was the last time she was ever seen alive. Later that night, when she failed to return home, and after Josh realized he couldn't get a hold of her on the phone, Sierra was reported missing to the police. As it was getting dark out, police made a terrifying discovery. Not even a mile away from her home, police found Sierra's bike deep inside of a cornfield just off of County Road 6, not far from where she was last seen by her boyfriend. Surrounding her bike were a ton of items that didn't belong to her, including a pair of men's sunglasses, a screwdriver, and a set of fuse boxes. Investigators described the scene as really eerie, and it made the hair on the back of their necks stand up, because not only did they find these odd items, but they also found signs of a massive struggle. They found motorcycle tracks through the cornfield, as well as broken corn stalks, but they also found corn stalks that were covered in blood. Police immediately closed down the road because this was a clear abduction, and they quickly brought in the FBI for assistance. Together, they tried tracking her location through her Fitbit and her phone, and it did provide them with a ping several miles away from where her bike was found. But this didn't prove to be a good lead because they still couldn't locate Sierra. One thing that they did find nearby, though, is incredibly disturbing, and it was a helmet with a bloody handprint on it. Authorities then started focusing on her boyfriend Josh, not only because he was the last person to be with her before she disappeared, but also because he was riding his motorcycle that day, and police did find motorcycle tracks in the cornfield. But police were able to quickly rule him out based on evidence found at the crime scene, specifically his helmet that he had with him, which obviously wasn't the one used in Sierra's abduction. That and the fact that he was super cooperative and allowed them to search whatever they needed, and Sierra's family even said that Josh would never hurt her. So then a massive search was launched involving local authorities and the FBI, and everyone was pretty focused on the cornfields, but police also started knocking on doors in the neighborhood to see if anyone heard or saw anything. Police specifically wanted to knock on the home of James Worley, who also lived on County Road 6, just like Sierra. In fact, they pretty much lived right down the road from each other. They said they kind of just had this hunch to knock on his door, and when he answered, he immediately began acting suspicious. James started oversharing a bunch of really self-incriminating details, like how he was riding his motorcycle that day in the same area, but it had broken down in the cornfield. Then James started listing off several items that he just so happened to lose in the cornfield, which included some sunglasses, a screwdriver, and, you guessed it, some fuse boxes. This kind of made the detective's jaw drop, because at this point in time, none of that information had been released to the public. So the fact that he just blatantly said that, it seemed pretty clear that he was involved. James also told authorities that when he had broken down out there in the cornfield, he found 2 bikes and decided to take one, which would explain why his fingerprints are probably on them. He then looks them in the eyes and says, quote, "I didn't steal anything or kill anyone." End quote. So because of how sinister that entire encounter was, police decided to run a background check on James, and what they found is horrifying. In July of 1990, James was arrested and convicted for the assault and abduction of another woman named Robin Gardner. The circumstances surrounding that case are eerily similar to Sierra's. That day, Robin was riding her bike when James ambushed her and hit her with his truck. He then got out, struck her over the head, and put her in handcuffs. He then held a screwdriver to her neck, telling her that he would kill her if she screamed. As he was trying to force her into his truck, Robin somehow luckily escaped. He was arrested and charged with her abduction and sentenced to possibly 10 years in prison, but he was released early after just 3 years, and he was actually released because he petitioned himself. He then went to prison again in 2000 for drug and firearm charges, but again, he was released early due to his own petition. After this, he was put in mandated therapy, and in one session, he told his therapist that he had learned from each abduction that he had done, and the next one he was going to bury. So this was definitely enough information to begin searching James' property, and on his property, police found a barn that would later become known as the Barn of Horrors. Inside the barn, police found a big green chest with a bunch of women's underwear in it, some of which were bloody. They also found restraints and a carpet-lined freezer that was stained with blood that he had buried on his property. Police then found blood on his motorcycle and zip-tie restraints and a ski mask in his truck. Sierra was nowhere to be found, but they did find an overwhelming amount of her DNA on a piece of duct tape and an air mattress in his barn. And adding to the creepiness is the fact that his property was literally plastered with recording devices. After checking his phone records and seeing that it placed him at the crime scene for 2 hours during the time that Sierra was missing, James was officially arrested. He was arrested on abduction charges, but at this point Sierra was still missing, so all hope was that she would be found alive somewhere soon. But sadly, 3 days after she was reported missing, her body would be found buried in a shallow grave in a field just off of County Road 7. This was only a few miles away from James' property. She had been hogtied and had a large plastic toy shoved so far into her mouth as a gag that it broke her teeth. She was also found to be wearing an adult diaper. Sierra's official cause of death was asphyxiation caused by the large plastic toy, but there was no evidence of any SA. James was indicted on 19 counts for charges like aggravated murder and kidnapping, in which he pleaded not guilty. At the trial, it was revealed that he had been watching some pretty bad porn related to what he ended up doing to Sierra up until he committed the crime. It was found that James had passed Sierra on the road that day as she was riding her bike, and then during a crime of opportunity, he hid in the cornfield a little ways up the road and then attacked her as she rode by. He then struck her in the head with his helmet, knocking her unconscious. He then dragged her into the corn and waited until it was dark. Meanwhile, he called his brother to make up a fake story about his motorcycle breaking down, but little did his brother know that Sierra was fighting for her life right next to James while he was on the phone. He then rode his motorcycle home, drove back in a white van where he picked her up, and then took her back to his barn where he eventually killed her. One of the key pieces of evidence in this case, outside of the DNA, was a witness who had seen a white van speeding down that road the night of the abduction. It was reportedly speeding so much that the witness got a license plate number, which was found to be registered to James. His defense argued that all of the sexual things found in James' barn were props and part of a corn studio that he had planned to start. They said that although he did have a fetish disorder, he wasn't responsible for the murder of Sierra. Ultimately, with overwhelming amounts of both Sierra's and James' DNA found at the abduction site, as well as in his barn, paired with his phone records putting him at the crime scene, James was found guilty and sentenced to death. His current execution date is set for May 20th of this year. A big reason that he got that ruling is because his former abduction victim, Robin Gardner, spoke at his trial. She said that she knew deep down that she needed to be Sierra's voice because she is no longer here, and she knew that fear all too well. The only good thing that has come out of this is Sierra's law, which was started by her family in Sierra's honor. This law has created a violent offender database that is easily accessible to not just law enforcement, but to the public as well. This allows you to see if there are any violent offenders living in your neighborhood, which is extremely important because had this been around when Sierra was abducted, maybe things would have been different. At the time, even though James was a violent offender and had kidnapped women before, he wasn't in any state or federal offender databases. James was found to fit the profile of a serial offender, and police and even his own family believe that he could possibly have more victims. His family suspects him of killing at least 2 other women, but their remains have yet to be found. So as of today, he's never been officially charged with anything else. But this does make sense because in 2020, the FBI searched his property again. This time they brought in excavation equipment and dug everything up. This wasn't related to Sierra's case, so it makes me wonder what exactly they were looking for and if they ever found anything. Sierra's story is one that I will never be able to forget because it 100% could have been prevented.
However, coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
This massive billboard fell, killing 14 people. A large billboard in India collapsed the other day due to severe raging thunderstorms, and it sadly killed 14 people and injuring another 75. A rescue operation took place on Tuesday morning, and Indian authorities said they rescued 89 people since the accident occurred. The rain and wind caused by the storm made the 100-foot-tall billboard fall onto a gas station in a suburban area. You can find videos on social media of the billboard shaking back and forth before giving away and falling onto the gas station, crushing people and cars. The video isn't graphic, but knowing what happens to the innocent people when the billboard falls and hits the gas station make it a very eerie and disturbing watch. But if you want to find it, you can easily watch it on X. Keep in mind, this billboard was 100 feet tall, so it was like a literal building falling onto these people. 32 people who were injured from this unfortunate situation have already been discharged from the hospital, but many more are still in there. May everybody rest in peace who died in this unfortunate situation, and may the surviving people with injuries have a speedy recovery.
One of the most disturbing movies that's out right now, The Human Centipede.
Oh my gosh, I've heard about this shit and I have not watched it, and I don't want to watch it, bro.
A little like backstory of like what goes on.
The whole lore.
Human Centipede 1, basically it was this crazy doctor, and he was obsessed with making a human centipede connect a human
to another human
from rectum to mouth to rectum to mouth. Somebody ate something, they digested it, they would eat it, the other person would eat that, and then it would just...
Oh my god.
The shit what the first person ate would eventually travel out of the last person. So
well, why? Did they ever say why he wanted to do it?
Bro, it was just like...
Just because?
Yeah, that's what he liked. But the second one is a guy who's a security worker, and he's obsessed with the first movie.
Oh my gosh, don't...
To the point where he like
masturbates to this, just the thought of a human centipede, and he just goes on a spree, gathers his victims, and ends up killing a couple people. Eventually his fantasy becomes
true,
and he recreates
the movie
in real life.
How the do people come up with? How many movies are there of this shit?
3? I only seen 2, and the second one's a little bit more disturbing too, because it's like, it looks so low budget. It's black and white.
What's the scene that's embedded in your head that you're never gonna forget?
The final scene of the second movie, bro.
What happens in the final of the second?
Basically, he feeds them out of a bowl. Well, nobody's using the bathroom, so what he does is he injects them with laxative. Yo! You start.
One employee killed another employee execution style down in the tunnels, and then he came over here to the power plant and he shot himself at the base of the stairs. I promised Colin to show him the saddest room on the sanatorium.
So this is all stuff from actual patients.
85 to 90% of the people that were here involuntarily, and they didn't want to be here. Being up here by yourself is terrifying.
Something in the hindbrain is screaming, do not go in that building. Don't go in that tunnel. The heebie-jeebie factor is just off the charts.
We're at the scariest place in America, the Indiana State Sanatorium.
One just went off. Down here.
Girl, dude.
This room is draining everything.
Are you like trying to close the curtain?
Are you filming this?
Yeah. Dude, hold behind you, dude.
What? Look at
that's crazy.
So he's dying. Anybody?
Now that's definitely a hot spot,
Dude,
is it not?
Dude, it looks like a person.
The bear fell off.
Okay.
You must leave.
Apologize now. Get here. God, what the?
He died and then cooked himself in a hot room, and it says when they came to get him away, the meat just came off the bones.
This man disappeared from the middle of a music festival after sending some very strange texts. It was 2018. Kevin Graves was a 28-year-old from Michigan. He had 3 siblings and was an all-round really nice guy. He was in a relationship at the time and the pair were living together. As many young couples do, they decided to book a music festival together. Now this was called the Electric Forest Music Festival in Rothbury. However, the festival has a bit of a reputation, as many festivals do, for having quite a lot of substances there and also some crime. Regardless, the couple headed there on the 27th of June that year. He remained in contact with his siblings and his parents throughout the festival. Nothing seemed to be amiss. That was until the morning of Sunday the 1st of July. Now this was the final day of the festival. His dad received some weird text messages from him quite early in the morning. It was 7:55 a.m. and one of the messages said, "I love you so much for your service, Dad. Thank you for your service." His mum tried to text him later that morning to kind of check if everything was okay and asked him if he had a nice time. The reply back was simply the word nothing. Shortly after this, communication stopped. Now the day after this, on the 2nd of July, Kevin and his girlfriend were due to go home. However, she called his parents with some alarming news. They'd had an argument the day before and he'd vanished. Now the argument was apparently due to Kevin being paranoid and accusing her of cheating on him. His phone and belongings remained at the campsite, but Kevin was nowhere to be found. Searches were fruitless and even dive teams got involved and found absolutely nothing in the local bodies of water. No one has ever seen him again. There's been no activity on his bank card since he vanished. A $10,000 reward is currently being offered for any information leading to the discovery of Kevin.
Dark side of Shirley Temple.
Oh my gosh.
She was born around the time of the Great Depression. So obviously desperate. They needed money and stuff. They kind of exploited Shirley Temple. Taking any fucking role, no matter what it was.
Or what she had to do.
They were taking the roles. At the age of 3, she ended up playing war babies, right? It was just a bunch of kids and they were playing adults. They were playing soldiers. And she had a role as an exotic dancer.
You're lying, bro.
No, this is deadass. It's out, bro. In all these movies, there was a bunch of other kids. Obviously, when you're a kid, they do bad shit, right?
Yeah.
But the thing is that the directors themselves would punish the kids. The black box.
Fuck was the black box?
You were put into a little room with the noise canceling foam walls. There was an ice block on the floor and you would have to sit on it. She obviously started getting older and shit. And there was this one guy. She thought that he was a big executive, a movie producer and shit.
I went into the office of Arthur Freed and he was going to talk to me about a movie he wanted to put me in. I'm 12 years old, and I thought he was a producer, but instead he was an exhibitor. And I'd never seen anyone naked before, except myself. I had no clue about what was happening. So it struck me so funny, I laughed at him. And I laughed uproariously. I had tears, and he got infuriated. And he said, out, 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 go.
A string of murders in Portland, Oregon have now officially been linked and connected back to at least one person of interest. This is everything we know so far. Last month, Portland police shut down online speculation about a possible serial killer in the Pacific Northwest, but now they state otherwise. Concern sparked after 6 women were found dead either on the side of the road or in wooded areas near Portland since February. After news of a possible serial killer went viral, Portland police shut down the rumors, but on Monday, the Multnomah County District Attorney's Office officially announced that the mysterious deaths of these 4 women, Kristen Smith, Charity Lynn Perry, Bridget Webster, and Ashley Reel, are all connected and have been linked to at least one person of interest. The DA's office hasn't officially named the suspect, but many other local agencies say the person of interest is 38-year-old Jesse Lee Calhoun. Jesse has an extensive criminal history and was reported to be living in the area at the time of the murders. He's been in the Snake River Correctional Institution since July 6th on unrelated charges, and he has not yet been charged in the 4 deaths. All 4 victims were found dead between February and May in different locations throughout Oregon. 22-year-old Kristen Smith was reported missing on December 22, 2022. Her body was found on February 19th in southeast Portland. The body of 24-year-old Charity Lynn Perry was found on April 24th in a culvert near East Historic Columbia River Highway. 31-year-old Bridget Webster was found 6 days later on April 30th on an isolated road in Polk County. And on May 7th, the body of 22-year-old Ashley Reel was found in a wooded area in nearby Clackamas County. The Oregon State Medical Examiner is still working to determine exactly how all 4 victims were killed. No other information, including how the person of interest was linked to all 4 victims, is being released at this time. According to the DA's office, investigators were working with 9 different law enforcement agencies in Oregon for several months. And although no charges have been filed in connection to the murders, they state that they believe there is no active threat or danger to the community. Anyone with information is asked to contact the numbers on the screen.
Less than 2 hours after that video was filmed, the girl on stage in that video would be dead. Her name was Christina Grimmie. She was a famous singer here in America, and she was murdered in 2016. So Christina had been making music and performing all of her life, but her real rise to fame started when she was on the show The Voice. After Christina was on The Voice, the world kind of opened up for her. She made her major label debut, she started going on tours all across the world, and she was a rising star. Sadly though, she attracted the attention of a very disturbed individual who can actually be seen here in footage from her final show, creepily watching Christina perform from the crowd, knowing what he was about to do. That man was 27-year-old Kevin James Loibel. So Christina's performance that evening ended at about 10 p.m. And afterwards, she moved over to a little booth to sign autographs for people who had come to the show. At around 10:24 p.m., Kevin approached Christina. Christina, thinking he was just like every other fan there, opened her arms up to give him a big hug. But that's when Kevin retrieved a Glock pistol from his person and shot her 3 times at point-blank range. After the shots rang out, Christina's brother tackled Kevin to the ground. Yes, sadly, Christina's brother was there working the booth with her that evening. But after a fight, Kevin managed to get himself free. He retrieved his Glock and he took his own life right next to Christina's body. Sadly, Christina had been shot twice in the chest and once in the head. And by 10:59 p.m., not even a full hour after she finished her performance, Christina Grimmie was pronounced dead. Afterwards, Kevin's family left this note for the media. This was all they had to say after the tragedy. But fans even to this day remember Christina as an amazing singer and talk about the potential that she had if she hadn't been taken from this world so quickly. If you want to listen to more true crime stories, check out the podcast Murder in America that I co-host with my wife, Courtney. You can listen to it on any streaming platform.
Ever heard about the Facundo cemetery incident?
No, I haven't.
There was this Mexican comedy TV show called Incognito. Well known, well loved. 2006, it would air its Halloween special that had many of the Latino community shook.
Why?
So it had Facundo, one of the hosts of the show, explore a cemetery, and it was supposedly haunted, and he sees a girl.
Like a little girl?
Yes. But his reaction seems so genuine that it doesn't seem fake, bro.
He's by himself?
Yeah. He does have crew with him as well, but they're like at a base camp.
It's already scary, bro.
¡Manifiéstense! ¡San maricas! ¡Hagan algo! Y con todo respeto para los muertos.
Shit. 15 minutes after he said that.
First of all, he's fucking like bugging for even going to that cemetery, bro.
Amiga, ¿cómo te llamas?
Oh man.
Amiga. Niña. Ay, no seas imbécil. ¡Con lentes! ¡Davor! ¡Venga, güey! ¡Venga, güey! ¡Por favor!
And hearing the scream is crazy. Imagine being him and hearing that shit.
Bro, I'll be sucked, bro. Again.
Bro, booking it.
Bro, I'll book it.
What's one true crime case that keeps you up at night? Mine is the disappearance of Patricia Lee Otto, and I went down the rabbit hole with this case. On August 31st, 1976, 24-year-old Patty Otto returned to her home in Lewiston, Idaho with her two young daughters after an evening business class. She tucked them into bed in the basement, and then she was greeted by her husband, Ralph. Patty's class went late that night, and it upset Ralph. It made him think that she was out cheating, so an argument broke out. Ralph was pretty controlling and abusive, and he was also an alcoholic. Their 3-year-old daughter Suzanne woke up to the commotion and snuck upstairs, and the last thing she saw was her dad strangling her mom, who was wearing red pants and a white shirt, before Patty was dragged out of sight. And that was the last time anybody saw Patty, as she mysteriously disappeared that night. A few months into the investigation, Ralph was reportedly annoyed with being bothered, so he hired a contract killer to murder the lead investigator in his wife's disappearance. But this contract killer was actually an undercover cop, so instead, Ralph was arrested and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Fast forward 2 years into Patty's disappearance. A woman's body was found in a shallow grave in the woods near Elgin, Oregon by a father and son who were out elk hunting. The woman, who became known as the Finley Creek Jane Doe, fit Patty's description to a T, right down to the red pants and the white blouse that Patty was last seen wearing. But before anybody could make a connection, Oregon State closed Finley Creek Jane Doe's case, even though it was an unsolved homicide, and had her remains destroyed. They were then transferred to a different funeral home and never returned, and they've since been deemed lost. By the time Patty's daughter Suzanne learned about this, it was 2 years ago, and she only found out because she stumbled across the composite sketch of the Finley Creek Jane Doe online and realized that it looked identical to her and her mom. Her father, Ralph, was the prime suspect in Patty's disappearance, but he died in 1983, taking all of his secrets to the grave. There's a lot more to this case that I couldn't fit into one TikTok video, so if you want to learn more and if you want to hear directly from Suzanne, I interviewed her for the first episode of my podcast. Please help spread awareness, and even if you don't want to listen, just share this wherever you can. Patty was silenced in 1976, and she deserves justice.
This pedophile committed a crime so disturbing that a petition was created that asked the government to publicly hang him. And the petition gathered thousands of signatures. This is 33-year-old Benjamin Taylor from West Virginia. And in 2016, he would commit one of the most sickening crimes I've ever read about. Back in 2016, Benjamin was living with his girlfriend, a woman named Amanda Adkins. At the time, Amanda had recently given birth only 9 months ago to her baby daughter, Emily. Emily was a beautiful young girl. And I want to warn you all right now, the details that we're about to discuss are some of the most disturbing I've ever covered. So in October of 2016, Benjamin had only been living with his girlfriend Amanda for about a month. And on the morning of Emily's death at around 4:30 a.m., Amanda woke up and went downstairs to search for her baby. When she went downstairs, she saw Benjamin Taylor with his pants unzipped sitting in the dark. Amanda then noticed that her 9-month-old daughter's limp body was lying nearby on a pile of sheets and laundry. Amanda screamed at Benjamin and grabbed her daughter's lifeless body, but he remained silent and stared at the ground. The details of what had just happened down there are disturbing. Local authorities would call this the worst assault that they had seen in decades. You see, Benjamin and Emily were covered in the infant's blood. After the child's body was examined, the authorities were able to determine that she had been assaulted by an adult male multiple times. The infant child was also bleeding extensively and had suffered head trauma. Emily had a fractured skull and brain hemorrhaging. Authorities believe that Emily may have been shaken violently, or even thrown to the ground or slammed against a hard object. When police arrived at the scene, Benjamin Taylor was observed trying to wipe something off of his groin. That was eventually determined to be Emily's blood. He also told authorities that he remembered taking the baby to the basement, but that he blacked out after that. You see, he had been smoking and drinking the night before, and that was his excuse. Thankfully, Benjamin was convicted of all charges and sentenced to life in prison without mercy, as you can see right here. But for some people, that just wasn't enough. And like I said at the beginning of this video, a petition was created which asked the government to publicly hang Benjamin. And this petition, before it was shut down, gathered over 50,000 signatures. I mean, this truly is one of the worst things that I've ever covered here on my TikTok. And personally, I don't think that life in prison is enough for this guy. I mean, the pain that poor Emily went through before she was eventually killed is just heartbreaking on every single level. And I just hope and pray that the other prisoners that are in there with Benjamin find out, or already have found out, exactly what he did to land himself in there. If you want to hear more true crime stories, listen to the podcast Murder in America that I co-host with my wife, Courtney. It's available on all streaming platforms.
This man was going to plant flowers and grow food with this man's body. On December 24th, 2019 in Michigan, a 25-year-old man named Kevin Bacon was talking to another man on the dating app Grindr. Kevin was a hairdresser and was going through tough times in his life. He was trying to save money to move somewhere else so he can get a fresh start. Kevin told his roommate that he found someone on Grindr and that he was going out for the night. The doorbell camera shows him leaving around 5 p.m. and sadly, this was the last time he was ever seen. The next day was Christmas and Kevin had planned to have breakfast with his entire family, but concerns started to grow when he didn't show up. After he missed the breakfast, his family called his cell phone, but there was no answer. They then went to his apartment, but Kevin was nowhere to be found, and fearing the worst, his father called the police to report him missing. Friends, family, and police searched neighboring towns, forest areas, and farmlands. For 3 days, the group searched for Kevin in hopes of finding him alive or clues on where he could be. They then found Kevin's car parked outside of a store, and inside the car was his phone, wallet, and some of his clothes. The police checked his phone and found messages with Kevin and another man. And it was the man he met on Christmas Eve. The police used this information, which led them to a house where a 51-year-old man named Mark Latunsky lived. And on the 28th of December, the police knocked on the door and conducted a search of the whole property. Mark invited the police in and was wearing no shirt and only a brown leather kilt. The police then went around the house and made their way into the basement where they found a secret room. And inside this room, they made a truly horrifying discovery. Mark had strung up Kevin by his ankles with rope, and chunks of flesh were missing from his body. Kevin had a stab wound on the back of his neck, and his throat had been slashed. And also, Kevin's testicles were missing, and Mark used a knife to remove them and then deep-fried them and ate them. After finding Kevin in this awful state, Mark was arrested, and then he told the police his version of what happened. He told them the two of them met on December 24th after talking on Grindr. They agreed to meet in a parking lot, the same place Kevin's car was found. He then said that they agreed to act out a fantasy Kevin wanted to try. Kevin stripped naked and put on a blindfold, ankle restraints, and wrist restraints. They then went back to Mark's house where they had consensual sex, and after, Mark claimed that Kevin told him he wanted to end his own life. Mark then claimed that they agreed he would assist in killing Kevin, under the condition that Kevin's body would be used for a purpose. Mark said he used the knife to stab Kevin in the back of the neck and then took him to the secret room and strung him up with rope. He then opened up a trap door underneath where Kevin was hanging from and slit his throat. The blood drained from his body and dripped onto the dirt outside from the open trap door. This was done so Kevin's body can fertilize the plants outside the house. As part of the agreement, Mark said he would use Kevin's bone marrow to plant tulips, his intestines to grow chestnuts, and would use his muscles to make human beef jerky. Mark also admitted to cutting off Kevin's genitals and eating them. Mark is a father of 4 and a highly intelligent man, and he even earned a master's degree in chemistry. But he had many mental health issues like depression, anxiety, and even paranoid schizophrenia. He had medication that could help him with these issues, but his ex-wife said he refused to take them. Mark's story did have some inconsistencies though. While the two were texting on Grindr, Kevin had asked for a reassurance that he would be safe during the meeting multiple times. There were no signs that Kevin wanted to be hurt or killed by Mark. Mark even had other victims too who escaped, but they didn't suffer the extent Kevin did. Mark's husband of 3 years, Jamie Arnold, told the media he had no idea of Mark's mental health issues until July 2019. He said he suspected something was wrong with him, but didn't think he was capable of committing such a disturbing act. Jamie left the house in September and didn't live there during the time this happened. Mark was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for committing this awful act. This is just honestly disturbing, and it goes to show that you have to be careful with who you talk to online. May Kevin rest in peace. He did not deserve this at all.
This is one of the most unsettling and baffling unsolved mysteries I've ever heard. This is the creepy case of the Yuba County Five. It was February 1978 in Yuba County, California. A group of 5 men between the ages of 24 and 32 were about to travel to Chico for a basketball game. Now, the group all had learning difficulties but were well prepared for the trip ahead. The men were Bill Sterling, Jack Hewitt, Ted Weir, Jack Madruga, and Gary Mathias. They made it to California State University for the basketball game and then tried to head home. Now, this was the 25th of February. They all got back into the car and drove to downtown Chico, where they stocked up on snacks for the journey ahead. This was at around 10 p.m. and the shop assistant specifically remembers the group coming in because she was actually a bit miffed that they'd come in as she was just trying to close. When they failed to return home the next morning, they were reported missing to police. Now, it took a few days before an eerie discovery was made. The car was found 70 miles from where they'd last been seen. Now, strangely, the car was kind of up a mountain at this point. It wasn't on any direct route back to their home. The car was also in perfect working order, so it wasn't like they'd broken down or anything and had to go for help. There was also a full tank of petrol. Now, inside was food and drink wrappers, indicating that they'd eaten those snacks that they'd bought from that shop. It seemed that the car had got stuck in snow, but the snow wasn't exactly deep, and these were 5 men who would have been more than capable of pushing the car out. Local news stations broke the news, and one tip came in of note. This was a man called Joseph who owned a cabin near where the car was discovered. He said he'd actually also been stuck in snow around that area at the time that the boys vanished. He saw headlights in the distance and saw a car with a group of individuals kind of huddled around the car, and he swears that one was a woman holding a child. He said he tried to get the attention of the group, but they all kind of just walked off. Then there was another devastating discovery. This time it was months later as the snow started to melt. 4 of the 5 men's bodies were found. Although some bodies had been disturbed by wild animals, autopsies confirmed the men died of hypothermia and Ted had died of starvation. Now, this actually raised way more questions than answers. Ted's body was found inside a trailer, and the length of his beard indicated that he'd actually survived for months after they vanished. Ted's shoes were interestingly also missing too. Now, the men were found near a campsite which had plenty of food and warm clothing if they were struggling with the weather conditions. They could easily have accessed this, so why didn't they? As for Gary, his body has never been found. So what happened to these men? Why were they up a mountain? Did they take a wrong turn? Why didn't they eat the food nearby? Why did they abandon the car? How did Ted survive so long? I would love to hear your theories, so please pop them in the comments.
A new cartel video was released a couple days ago, and it's absolutely brutal. As this cartel war is heating up, another video was released on May 6th, 2024. A disturbing piece of propaganda was released by one of the cartels depicting the brutal execution of a rival cartel member, which shows the current brutal situation between these two cartels. The video is 1 minute long, and it was recorded in the middle of the night and in the middle of nowhere. As you start the video, you see the captive who is lying on his back on the ground and is being held down by 3 cartel members. One is holding him down by pressing a shovel against his chest, another is holding him down by the shoulders, and the third is pressing the victim's head against the ground. It's also apparent the victim has already been tortured because at least one of his ears has been cut clean off. The cartel member holding the victim's head down is also carrying what looks like a penknife, and it's pretty small. And as the captive is being held down, the cartel members begin to mock him. And one of them says, "Okay buddy, you're next," and then jokes and asks the fellow cartel members, "Is this how it's done?" while placing the knife on the victim's throat. And his fellow cartel member responds, "Yes, that's exactly how it's done." The cartel member with the small knife then starts slicing back and forth on the victim's throat, as well as pulling underneath his chin. and covering his mouth with his hand. The victim then lets out a horrible groan as the blade causes him to wither. The knife is very blunt and takes a while to pierce the man's throat. The cameraman then gets close to the victim's face and you see his eyes dart around the area in complete panic. The cartel member then keeps trying to cut him and eventually the blade cuts into the victim's throat, and blood begins to leak. The victim's eyes then bulge open as he is experiencing this awful and excruciating pain. The cartel members then continue to mock the victim, and the cartel member who is cutting the victim's throat then pulls underneath his chin harder, and it causes the gash on the victim's neck to widen, and the blade then penetrates the windpipe. The victim then closes his eyes in pain, and you hear the sound of wheezing and bubbling blood. The cartel member then brutally twists the victim's neck right and left as he cuts the sides of his neck. And as the cartel member hit the carotid artery, blood begins to pour even worse and puddles on the ground. And this also causes the wheezing and bubbling blood sounds to get even worse. The victim's neck at this point has been cut so deep that it doesn't even hold the head onto the body with any strength. This then allows the cartel member to twist the head back and forth with ease. It's absolutely gut-turning. A cartel member then says, "Look how nice that wet works looks," which is another word for a beheading. Another then says, "Look how nice that blood looks pouring out." That's exactly how it should be done. The sounds of wheezing and bubbling blood can still be heard, and although the victim's eyes are still open, they stopped moving. After twisting and turning the head, the cartel member then tries to stab his way through the spinal cord from the front of the neck, and it's a very close-up view, and this is where the video concludes. These cartel videos are releasing quite often this year as the violence picks up, and they are just disturbing, and the violence and the videos don't seem to be stopping anytime soon. But as always, I recommend to never watch or search for these videos. They are just brutal and you don't want to see them.
However, coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
Girl took deadly revenge against her parents but was not expecting what happened next. Jennifer Pan was born in Ontario. Her parents were Bitch Hay Pan and Hue Han Pan. They both made a huge effort to provide for Jennifer and give her the life that they never had. They soon started earning a lot of money down to their hard work and had fancy cars and a lovely home to show for it. Now, they were quite strict with Jennifer and it seemed to work. She was very good academically, but also was a really well-liked girl. She did have hopes of being a professional skater, but these were unfortunately becoming less likely down to an injury. She really struggled to come to terms with this and started harming herself as a way to cope. When she was around 16, she started dating an older guy named Daniel. That was until he got kicked out of school for having substances in his car. Jennifer's schoolwork started to suffer, and although she was initially offered a place at Ryerson University, they withdrew this. To cover this up, Jennifer started lying to her parents about her grades. She even started forging her report cards. When she was due to start uni, her dad gave her a brand new laptop. In order to keep up with the lie, she actually started leaving the house as if she was going to classes. Now, the next bit really reminds me of the Casey Anthony case. When Jennifer's graduation would have been due, she told her parents that they couldn't come because she only managed to get one ticket. Jennifer pretended to have graduated and also pretended to get a job at a children's hospital. However, her parents soon wised up to her lies. They confronted her and asked her why she didn't have a uniform or ID if she did in fact have this job. They took her laptop off her and also banned her from seeing her boyfriend. This all went on for about 2 years, with Jennifer's resentment towards her parents growing and growing. She finally got her laptop and phone back when she was 24. Now, despite having been banned from seeing him for so long, Jennifer reunited with Daniel. The two concocted a plan. They planned to kill Jennifer's parents and make it look like a botched robbery. Now, Daniel had connections with a hitman named Lenford. He agreed to kill the parents for a payment of $10,000. On Halloween 2010, the plan started to gain traction. On the 8th of November, Lenford confirmed that he was ready to take action. He texted Jennifer saying, "After work, okay, will be game time." That night, Jennifer intentionally unlocked the front door of her family home. She said goodnight to her parents, knowing that their gruesome end awaited them. Around 10:05 p.m., 3 men entered the house. This was Lenford with 2 others, David and Eric. The trio ambushed the house and tied Jennifer up to make it look like she was a victim too. They actually strapped her hands to the banister. They then grabbed the parents and after covering their heads, they shot them. The group ran from the house and Jennifer rang police at this point. However, she was not expecting what happened next. Her dad was miraculously alive. He'd somehow managed to survive the shooting. He was in a coma though until the 12th of November. Now, meanwhile, police were interviewing Jennifer about the series of events. They thought it was very strange that she had somehow managed to ring police despite being tied up. Jennifer's dad also confirmed once he was out of his coma that Jennifer appeared to be talking to the men like she knew them. Jennifer obviously hadn't considered how it would look to her parents in the moment because she thought that they were just going to be killed. Under increasing pressure from police, Jennifer finally confessed. The following year, the group of hitmen were also arrested. In 2014, Daniel, David, and Lenford got life sentences with no possibility of parole. Jennifer also got the same sentence. Eric's trial was deemed a mistrial, but then he was given 18 years in prison. He actually died in prison in 2018 after having been stabbed